back in 1 second.
Okay.
It is, yes.
So Angela, while we were chatting before you came online with Andrea, I just was talking to the guys about how it's so interesting to see the difference between 13 and 15, because while there's no question that it's made by the same man and it comes from the same place, the vintages themselves are so incredibly different. 13 being soft and expressive and available now, whereas the 15 is definitely a more classic style. It's bigger and more tannic, and in time will be one of the superstars that he's ever made. So it's a really interesting time to see these two side by side. So
that's absolutely.
If you can ask Angelo just to, when he gets back, just to describe briefly the difference between the two vintages. What I've asked everybody to do is have glasses 1 and 2 in front of them, which are the Voliero 13 and 15.
Okay, so we taste, 13 and 15 Voliero first, and then 13 and 15 Uccelliera. In addition, if you allow me, just a couple of words in addition to what you just said about, for sure, the two vintages are made by the same, are managed more than made by Andrea. Voliero and Uccelliera are both managed by Andrea. However, we will discuss while we taste, and we will learn by the tasting, but they do our expression of two different terroirs. So that's what the difference. Mi chiedeva Robert se gli puoi fare un'introduzione su quelle che sono le due differenze tra la 2013 e la 2015, e poi assaggiamo 13 e 15 Voliero e 13 e 15 Uccelliera.
Beh, la differenza diciamo c'è, perché le caratteristiche dell'annata sono come si può dire, molto importanti, perché poi le differenze sono quelle che caratterizzano l'annualità. La 2013 è sicuramente un'annata che rappresenta sicuramente un clima più fresco, e quindi un'annata che lavora molto sulla freschezza, un po' meno diciamo nella concentrazione, ma molto di più sull'eleganza.
So Andrea agrees with what you said on your introduction, Robert, and adds that for sure the 2013 is the climate, the growing season of the 13 was characterized more by a cooler climate versus the 15. And so the wines are showing kind of more acidity and freshness versus complexity and extraction.
Got you. Yeah.
Quindi si potrebbe dire che quando si parla di eleganza e di complessità, questo non vuol dire che nelle annate che hanno maggiore struttura non sono eleganti. Io dico che la 2013 predomina molto di più i frutti rossi dai frutti neri.
So he says, for instance, in a vintage like the 13, which is very elegant, there is a kind of more predominance of red berry fruit versus blackberry fruits.
You definitely pick up more of the blackberry in 15, the darker fruit components in 15, and a lighter fruit component in 13. Not necessarily lighter in structure, but definitely a feeling of that in the flavor profile.
Yes, the feeling you have, which is different. Dice che anche se riesci a trovare, diciamo, delle caratteristiche simili, è la sensazione che ti lasciano poi in bocca della differenza dell'attacco.
Sì, diciamo che le caratteristiche simili ci sono, perché poi alla fine il terreno è quello e il vitigno è quello, però le caratteristiche climatiche dell'annata sono importanti, perché questo permettono alle piante anche di estrarre di più o di meno quelle che sono le caratteristiche della mineralità del terreno. Insomma.
So he says, for sure, I mean, the grape varietal is the same. The soil is always the same. really what makes the difference is the growing season and how it influences the extraction and the characteristics that we then find in the bottle.
It's interesting, when I analyze a lot of the other 13 Brunellos, they seem to have ended up having a harder time coming to this quality level that Uccelliera has. I think that this beautiful finished tannin, there's a wonderful shimmery tannin on the 13, which places it in a very high bracket, qualitatively speaking. He's done.
I'm sorry, Robert, to interrupt you. Are you talking specifically on Uccelliera or on Voliero that we are
Voliero. I haven't looked at Uccelliera yet. Sorry,
ok,
Voliero.
gotcha.
Yeah.
Dice che è quello che assaggiando anche i 2013 della zona di Montalcino, ha detto che ha trovato diciamo difficoltà nel trovare picchi così alti come quelli nel Voliero, cioè ha una finezza e un'eleganza che difficilmente è riuscita a ritrovare in altre realtà di Montalcino sul 2013.
Sì, beh, insomma, allora vorrei fare una premessa. Il concetto dell'eleganza è sicuramente un principio che noi portiamo sempre presente in qualsiasi vendemmia, ma soprattutto non nella vendemmia, e nel percorso che facciamo durante la gestione agronomica delle viti, perché l'eleganza è anche sinonimo di piante che non hanno traumi durante la loro parte vegetativa, perché un trauma nel momento del vegetativo comunque può portare, o meglio, non si sa quanto può incidere poi nell'equilibrio del vino stesso quando va in bottiglia.
So Andrea says that elegance is certainly the goal that he wants to achieve with both Uccelliera and Voliero every vintage, respecting the characteristics of each vintage. But elegance doesn't come only when dealing with, for instance, a harvest or the winemaking, so after the picking. It is a lot related with what happens constantly in the vineyards and with the vines. So how the vines are trained, how the vineyards are managed, how the land is managed.
Right. What was very interesting for me was when I was reading a little bit recently on Brunello, Monica Lana from...
I don't hear you well now, Robert, sorry.
You can't hear? You can. Is that better?
I can't.
Okay.
Better.
Better, all right. What was interesting, Monica Lana from Wine Advocates was talking about Brunello being both accessible and complex at the same time. And I was trying to wrap my head around where she was coming from about this notion of it being intellectually quite a difficult wine to get a grip on, but at the same time being really easy to appreciate it at a beginner's stage. And I certainly, when I first started drinking Sangiovese, it was much easier for me to appreciate than Nebbiolo, for example, which I'm still, whilst I love it, it seemed to be a much harder wine to get one's arms around at an early stage. So do you agree that, does Andrea agree that, that as a grape type, your Sangiovese shows early, it has an accessible component, but it's still quite a complicated wine in the Brunello region?
Dice se sei d'accordo, perché stava parlando sulla il concetto di approcciabilità, ma longevità e complessità allo stesso tempo, no? E quindi dice, per me è sempre il paragone tra Sangiovese e Nebbiolo. Dice Andrea è d'accordo sul fatto che i suoi vini sono comunque accessibili anche nell'immediato e sviluppano poi la loro complessità e il loro percorso nel tempo.
Ma guarda, sono d'accordo in questo e credo che alcuni anni fa si pensava che per avere longevità un vino nell'immediato non rappresentasse molta eleganza. Invece io ritengo che l'eleganza di un vino è un fattore primario e quindi essendo un fattore primario l'eleganza, questo ti permette di avere un approccio fin da subito poter condividere il piacere che un vino, che vino rilascia, e dare poi nel tempo anche longevità, perché insomma spesso si pensa che la bottiglia sia la cura migliore per un vino che immediatamente non rappresenta un grande piacere nel berlo. Diciamo che il tempo smorza alcune caratteristiche, ma non è che le riesce a nascondere completamente.
Andrea, yes, he does agree with you, Robert. I mean, he says that certainly, I mean, especially in the past, there were the misconception that there were some wines that were non-elegant at first, and the elegance was something to achieve with bottle refinement, with some extra time in bottle, etc. So for him, his point of view is that elegance is of primary importance since the beginning. I mean, wine has to be elegant from the real beginning. We would say from the must. Okay? And it's not something that you achieve later on. So if a wine has some, how can I say? I mean, it is not. It's kind of angular, or I mean, it can soften the bottle. The bottle refinement can certainly soften a little bit of its character, but I mean, the elegance, if there is elegance, there is from the beginning.
Right, it's got to be a source. Before
yes,
we leave,
that the bottle refinement can certainly develop the bottle to develop certain flavors and certain characteristics. The wine matures. I mean, the wine is alive. But elegance and fineness are characteristics that, if there are from the real beginning.
Yeah. Before we leave the Voliero, I just had a question in the private...
let's. I'm sorry, Robert. Let's pour the glasses even for Andrea. So here we have. I'm sorry, don't know if you can see it. The light, yes. This is Voliero 2013. Here we go. And here, Voliero 15.
Thank you. That's great. So while Andrea is having a look at that, I'm just mindful of the time. We need to keep moving relatively quickly. The one question in private chat was the altitude of the vineyards for Voliero. Are they higher or lower in altitude than
Uccelliera?
Because I think I saw them. But
no, è il 13 che ho versato io. Sì. Ti sta chiedendo se l'altitudine delle vigne di Voliero, se sono più alte o più basse rispetto ad Uccelliera.
Diciamo che sono tendenzialmente più alte, ma soprattutto non hanno i vigneti bassi, quindi sono in una fascia di altitudine che è similare, non è che c'è 150, 250 e 350, siamo tutte a oltre 300 metri, quindi allo stesso fascia di riferimento.
So the main difference is that the vineyards of Voliero are basically standing, all of them, at an average of 300 plus meters. Whereas, and they reach up to 400 meters. Whereas those of Uccelliera are at 3 different altitudes. So we have the lowest one near the Orcha River, standing at about 150 meters. Then the vineyards around, what we say around the house. I mean, here you can see this is the cellar. We are just at the entrance cellar where there is Wi-Fi connection, something that we don't have to forget because we are in the middle of nowhere. So it's not given from granted to have Wi-Fi connection down here.
I know, because when we came to see you, we had not one but 2 GPS devices in the car, and they both gave up on us. We had Alexa and Siri, and they both got lost. It was a disaster.
So I was saying the vineyards around the house that are standing at about 250 plus meters. and the highest at 350, 400 meters. So it is actually the average of these three altitudes for what concerns Uccelliera. The vineyards of Voliero are standing as an average at a higher elevation.
Okay, well.
Okay.
So maybe, is Andrea okay for us to move to the Uccelliera now?
Se è a posto possiamo passare ad Uccelliera, c'è qualcosa che vuoi aggiungere?
Io vorrei aggiungere una cosa che ricollegandomi a quello che si diceva prima sulla gestione della bottiglia, è come pensare di fare avere un grande risultato durante la vendemmia, ma quando il massimo si lavora in vigna, e quindi la bottiglia accompagna il vino nella sua evoluzione, ma è difficile che poi diciamo riesca a modificare le caratteristiche del vino nella sua interezza, nella sua natura. Ecco. Quindi era solo per ritornare che spesso si considera l'ultimo percorso che il vino fa, oppure l'ultimo percorso l'uva fa durante la vendemmia, come la soluzione di tutti i problemi. Non è così.
So Andrea would only like to add, still related to the bottle refinement that we were talking before.
Oh, yeah.
He says there is still some kind of misconception about that we put the last step before opening the bottle, so the bottle refinement, as the resolution of the problems, if there are any problems in the bottle. Wrong. I mean, he says,
I mean, it right in the beginning.
Yeah, that's the point.
Yeah.
I mean, if the bottle refinement is like, he says, actually accompany the wine in this last part of the journey, but doesn't solve problems that may be into the bottle.
Yeah, gotcha. What's really interesting about the Uccelliera 13 and 15, I don't know how everybody else is feeling in their glasses, but the 13 is quite shy on the nose. It was so interesting in the Voliero. The Voliero the 13 was jumping out.
Jumping out.
In the Uccelliera, it's a little bit shy on the nose. I'm working it quite hard, and the wine was opened some time ago, whereas the 15 is just commanding attention straight away. It's sort of bursting out at you. I know that some of the critics have this notion when they speak about Uccelliera 13 that the thing that impresses people about it is this notion of the flavor wrapping all around the palate,
all around the mouth,
broad, lavish kind of fruit, which I guess is following this thing we spoke about earlier about early accessibility versus the 15. But I have to say, on the phenolics, just the nose alone, I'm in love with 15. It's sensational.
Allora, ha iniziato dicendo che per l'appunto quello che lo colpisce nel 2013 di Uccelliera è che è un pochino più chiuso rispetto a Voliero, e che Voliero invece viene immediatamente fuori.
Sinceramente questo è vero, perché la parte di terreno, che è la parte più bassa, questa argilla calcarea, tendenzialmente i vini le racchiude nella sua parte espressiva, diciamo.
Poi questa infatti è una caratteristica che lo si ritrova in generale un po' come caratteristica nelle due realtà. So it is what you're saying, it is perfectly right, and is actually we would love to add it is not a characteristic that we can find only on the 13 vintage, but it actually can be expressed in one of those differences between Uccelliera and Voliero.
Yes,
we were having exactly the same conversation with Andrea when tasting the latest vintage.
Oh, that's great.
Or even the 19, or when we bottled the Rosso di Montalcino 19 in early September. We were tasting the Rosso di Montalcino 19 Uccelliera and Voliero, and you can detect the same perception.
This generosity.
Yes. Voliero is kind of more expressive upfront from the real beginning, whereas Uccelliera tends to be kind of more, let me pass the word, austere in a certain way.
Austere, yeah. I know how you feel. To define the 15 in one word is this tannin, right? There's highly refined tannin, but it's definitely right there and it's not letting go now. It reminds me a lot of how 10 looked when it was first released. It had that kind of bruising kind of spirit about it. And I think that this will probably track along that way in terms of its maturation. It's at a very exciting point where it is now.
Dice che una delle caratteristiche che ritrova nel 2015 Uccelliera è questa sensazione proprio di tannini che sono hanno un grip, hanno una capacità, una tensione molto...
Una tensione diciamo noi in termini tecnici si usa dire una trama fitta, cioè dei tannini molto presenti ma fitti e quindi non ti fanno sentire come si può dire, la percezione austera, no? Però ti fanno sentire una trama di densità.
So well, actually, what Andrea says is, in fact, I mean, in Italian we would use the word tannini fitti meaning that
meaning that you get to spell that right. That's for sure.
I'm sorry, what you say, Robert?
I'll never be able to spell that. Tannini fitti. There's too many N's and C's.
Fitti with T, like Turin.
Oh, T. Okay, got you.
Yes. So meaning that, I mean, they are so well tied up together, making feel in your mouth like caressing the palate and like velvety. So where you're saying that do really cover your palate all the way through. Sì.
So while Andrea's pouring some more wine, there's a question from Grant about the age of the two vineyards, Voliero and Uccelliera. I'm very sure Voliero is a younger vineyard, but I'm not sure of how much younger in terms of vine age.
Andrea? I've lost him.
Oh, okay. He's probably lost in the cellar. That happened to me 2 or 3 times.
I can actually, while waiting for him, I mean, this kind of information, I'm sure that I won't give you the wrong information.
No problem, no problem.
Yes, no. So I can anticipate something that then Andrea can add something more. Okay. The oldest vineyard that were planted here at Uccelliera goes back to the 75. Okay. So that piece of vineyard is the oldest and is basically from where most of the Sangiovese for making Reserva comes from.
And that's the vineyard around the cellar?
No, it is a vineyard in the highest point.
At the highest point, okay. Right.
Yeah. And then there are vineyards like, for instance, the one that is right in front of the cellar that it dates back to 88. Then there are some other vineyards planted in early 90s.
So it's a series, a rolling progression of vine age. Yeah.
Yes, and then there are some new vineyards that actually are going to be in production in 1 or 2 years because just planted last year.
Right. Rosso di Montalcino? Is it more Rosso?
Well, I was talking about Uccelliera. The vineyards of Voliero. Yeah. L'età media dei vigneti di Voliero sono dagli anni 90.
Diciamo fine 90.
So the vineyards,
fine 90 e inizio 2000.
So the vineyards of Voliero are younger and they were planted in the late 90s and early 2000s. Okay. Right. For what concerns Rosso di Montalcino, it is very interesting because all the vineyards are registered in the DOCG Brunello di Montalcino. Okay, so so the selection of grapes to make Rosso di Montalcino actually is in multiple steps. I mean, Andrea selects the bunches and the grapes that are showing characteristics of more freshness and brighter character. that will address and deliver this kind of flavors, okay? The interesting point that I feel like underline is that when we talk about this matter, you know, that we are used to say that Rosso or DOC wine that is made from DOCG registered vineyards is made by declassifying the grapes, correct?
Yep.
Words are, they do have a meaning. And here we say that Rosso di Montalcino is made from a reclassification of grapes. It's not a declassification. I mean, it's a little thing, but makes you understand what his point of view is in making Rosso di Montalcino.
And his commitment to the quality of Rosso di Montalcino, it's a little bit like Barbera d'Alba, where people tend to discount it, or Dolcetto, where they tend to say, oh, this is just, you know, a fallback wine, whereas people like Andrea are actually making it with a very serious attitude. But that might be a discussion for another day when we taste the Rosso.
Yes,
we'll
looking
ask
forward to that.
to come back. Yeah.
Oh, don't get them started. Don't get them started. They'll kill me. All right.
Yeah.
Angela, I have a question.
Yeah.
In terms of the as a New World, I was born as a New World wine drinker, and becoming used to Italian structure and tannins, etc., was a real challenge for someone with a palate like mine. I've since been able to get over that, but from a perspective of the tannins becoming softer and integrating, when does Andrea see this as the peak drinking time? What does he see as the peak drinking window for when the wine will be showing its best? Is it 5 years, 10 years? What's his view on the wine?
Chiede lui, in merito alla capacità dei tannini, no, di essere perfettamente integrati nel volume del vino, e quindi qual è secondo te la finestra temporale entro la quale il vino mostra le sue migliori caratteristiche?
Beh, se questo tu mi chiedi di prevedere il futuro, ho capito.
No, proprio. No. Diciamo
no, ascolta, è difficile avere un parametro, perché l'evoluzione dei vini, cioè, diciamo, la gestione di un prodotto naturale è sempre difficile, perché non si sa mai la sua evoluzione e quando trova la sua migliore.
Capito bene, però
generalmente io oggi ti posso dire che ho avuto la fortuna di assaggiare Uccelliera, diciamo, l'annata 2000, anno scorso, l'annata 2005, che è stata una delle prime annate, e ancora manifesta freschezza, quindi no, scusa, il 95, che è stata una delle prime annate, ancora manifesta la sua freschezza. Abbiamo assaggiato l'anno scorso il 95, il 2005 e il 2015 a ottobre, quindi a distanza di 10 anni abbiamo sentito diciamo queste evoluzioni, e rappresenta freschezza, così come il 2006, che è stato il primo anno di Voliero, e sono vini ancora rappresentano energia, e quindi ti fanno pensare che hanno ancora davanti a sé delle annate in cui possono scrivere parole importanti.
Shall we translate for the rest of the team?
Yes, please. I'm just hoping that your answer wasn't just yes.
So Andrea was saying that he says, reply to Lou saying, so do you want me to predict the future then?
Yeah, tell him, give him a hard time.
Yeah, usual.
So it is a hard question to answer, simply because every vintage is different. Every bottle has its own journey in the bottle. So even picking the same bottle at the same vintage, you know, you may have different experiences.
Yes.
So it is hard. It is a very, very hard question to answer. he says, based on my experience, I can say that last October 19, we opened bottles of Uccelliera 95, 2005, and 2015. And the oldest one, oldest one was still showing such a good tension, energy, and acidity. So making think that still has a future ahead of it.
Yeah.
And the same experience with Voliero, for instance. Voliero is a more recent, let me say, project, because the first vintage was 2006. So we celebrate the 10th year with the upcoming vintage 2016 next year.
Okay.
So the 2006 was still showing such an energy.
Yeah, that's amazing. There's a question about the soil differences between the two vineyard sites. I know it's a bit complex because Uccelliera has 3 different places, but is there a basic differential between the soil types?
Uno dei partecipanti chiede quali sono le differenze nel terreno tra le 2 aziende. Quindi ho constatato il fatto che Uccelliera è in 3 diverse diciamo altitudini, però sostanzialmente quali sono le differenze di terreno?
Allora, le differenze sono che Uccelliera è, diciamo, più vicino all'appendice del Monte Amiata, e quindi in un territorio che c'è c'è una cava di onice, quindi è molto ricco di minerali, e soprattutto anche una percentuale di argilla maggiore, e quindi è veramente un terreno molto complesso anche nelle sue caratteristiche e nelle sue diversità. E questo sicuramente insieme a delle altitudini diverse permettono alle radici delle piante di andare sia nella profondità ma anche nel clima ed estrarre in maniera diversa delle componenti che sono presenti nel terreno.
So he says, for what concerns Uccelliera, the soil is pretty complex actually, and is very rich in clay and calcareous, and it really allows the roots of the vines to develop in depth, and therefore the vines actually grow in pretty robust and long-lasting. Actually, I mean, we can actually have very pretty old vines.
Old vines, yeah.
Hey, Voliero.
Another question is about the oak. Dave Nordstrom was visiting you some time back, and he said you were experimenting with Slovakian oak.
Slavonian oak?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure we saw some when we were there 2 years ago. Do you use a mix of different oak, or what's your approach with it?
Un'altra domanda che chiede in merito all'invecchiamento. Quindi dice, mi ricordo di aver visto delle botti di Slavonia quando siamo stati in cantina, ma di illustrare appunto com'è la filosofia in merito a legni, all'invecchiamento.
Allora, la filosofia è quella che noi la fase della cantina è sicuramente dobbiamo accompagnare al meglio l'evoluzione dei vini, e l'evoluzione dei vini si accompagna al meglio avendo 2 tipologie di legno, sia rovere Slavonia che rovere francese. Perché? Perché la parte tannica di un vino è determinata da 2 basi di estrazione, la buccia e il vinacciolo. Quindi proprio per trovare e mantenere in equilibrio questi 2 tannini che siamo riusciti ad estrarre durante la fase di vinificazione, successivamente avere 2 tipologie di legno aiutano moltissimo a mantenere l'equilibrio che durante la vinificazione cerchiamo. Sinceramente per il Voliero, il rovere di Slavonia e il rovere francese lo utilizziamo più nella botte grande invece che nella botte piccola, mentre Uccelliera lavoriamo rovere Slavonia, botte grande e rovere francese nella botte piccola. Per quanto riguarda, ripeto, il Voliero, utilizziamo più la botte grande perché avendo un terreno che è molto preciso nelle sue caratteristiche, e quindi cerchiamo come possiamo dire, cerchiamo di mantenere più costante questa caratteristica anche nel legno.
So he says, for what concerns Uccelliera, we use both large Slavonian oak barrels and French oak barriques.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. The point is, the commitment is the one to interpret correctly the vintage and the grape varietal during the aging process. Okay, so respecting the varietal, respecting the growing season. So there is not basically a recipe. Okay. For Uccelliera, we use both. So Andrea reports that the best expression is the result is given by the use of mixing both different capacity and different types of oak. Voliero, for its characteristics, we mostly use large Slavonian oak barrels.
It's interesting because we see producers like Coldorcio doing that, and even Biondisanti, Macchiole. Everybody seems to be following that notion of getting the best characteristics out of a mixture of the two oaks. I personally love Slovakian oak. I think it lends a firmness but allows the fruit to shine. It seems to me, I just really love what that seems to lend. Are there any more questions before we say goodbye to you guys in Italy and wish you a good lunch? I'm sure it's lunchtime there now.
It is lunchtime as well as is your almost dinner time.
Yeah. Here we eat all the time. So if there's no more questions from anybody, I'm going to say thank you so much for joining us, guys. We're looking forward to seeing you again in a few months' time.
In person, yeah.
And talk about what that's doing in Italy. Thank you so much again.
Ti salutano e ringraziano tanto di
grazie di questa grazie a voi e grazie della vostra disponibilità e fortunatamente insomma questo ci ha permesso di ridurre queste distanze e di trascorrere un momento insieme, perché credo che il vino ma tutto l'agroalimentare ha bisogno di condivisione e di scambio di opinioni. Quindi credo che questo sicuramente porta un vantaggio per tutti, per me come produttore, ma anche per me come consumatore, perché anch'io sono un consumatore, e quindi scambiare delle riflessioni, delle opinioni è una ricchezza importante.
So, I mean, Andrea has enjoyed the chance to share and to see some faces during these crazy times. And yes, we do really, I mean, one is conviviality, and we do need to share comments and talk about, I mean, what we have in the glasses while waiting to be able to meet in person and to have even more a closer conversation.
Thank you so much.
Colgo l'occasione per rinnovare l'invito quando ci daranno la possibilità di potervi accogliere in azienda, tutti, anche oltre a voi anche i vostri coloro che hanno partecipato alla degustazione, di averli qua e magari insieme, facendo gli assaggi dalle botti, si può cogliere anche quelle sfumature che magari raccontarle non è così facile.
So, I mean, the invite is always open to come to Uccelliera as soon as we will be able to travel again.
Thank you so much.
So,
I'm sure we'll
experience the winery live.
Yeah, of course.
We know that's not a genuine offer because you can't find the place. We tried to right? So he's actually kidding everyone.
But you know, to find the little jewels, you have to suffer a little.
Yeah, that's what I keep telling myself.
I got lost both times, 2 times, lost both times.
So what are you looking for right immediately right after? I mean, you miss the taste.
We do. All right, thank you so much. We'll see you again soon.
Thank you all.
Yeah.
Guys, just a reminder that our next tasting is on Saturday next week. we're drinking all of Mike Dillon's Bindi releases, his current releases. So it's all his 18 Pinots and Chardonnays and his 19 Syrah. I'll send a note out on Sunday about it. So
Okay.
we'll see you all soon. Thanks so much for coming. It was great.
All right. Thanks, Robert. Cheers, everybody.
Take it easy.
Thank you.
Very nice.
See you. Bye.
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 Ciao.
Bye bye.
Ciao.
Take it easy.
Ciao.
Ciao.
Ciao. Ciao.
Ciao, Jen.
Ciao.
Ciao.
Ciao. See you in Italy soon, hopefully.